8-year-old Lily clutched Max's leash with trembling fingers as she entered the imposing Lancaster County Courthouse. The massive stone building loomed against the autumn sky like something from a nightmare, its granite steps worn smooth by decades of troubled footsteps. Lily's golden retriever service dog pressed reassuringly against her leg, sensing the waves of anxiety radiating from his young handler. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," whispered Porter, the social worker assigned to Lily's case. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and Lily noticed. At 8, she had become adept at reading adults' faces, at detecting the small inconsistencies between what they said and what they truly meant. It was a survival skill she'd developed over the past year. Inside, Judge's courtroom buzzed with the particular tension that only bitter family disputes generate. The polished oak benches were filled with court reporters, legal assistants, and a few curious law students who had come to observe the controversial judge known for her unconventional approaches to family court. Judge had made headlines last year when she'd pioneered allowing therapy dogs for child witnesses, a program that had faced significant opposition from legal traditionalists, but was slowly gaining acceptance across the state. Lily's parents sat at opposite tables, separated by the center aisle but connected by invisible threads of animosity that seemed to crackle in the air between them. Sarah, Lily's mother, a kindergarten teacher with kind eyes now rimmed red from crying, clutched a tissue in her lap. Her attorney, a young public defender named who had taken the case pro, shuffled through disorganized papers, looking overwhelmed by the proceedings. Across the aisle, Richard exuded confidence in his tailored charcoal suit. The real estate developer's reputation in Lancaster preceded him, generous donations to political campaigns, a wing of the Children's Hospital bearing his family name, chairmanship of 3 prestigious boards. His legal team consisted of 3 attorneys from one of Philadelphia's most expensive firms, their leather portfolios and coordinated power ties creating an intimidating wall of legal expertise. As Lily took her seat in the special witness area near the judge's bench, she felt the weight of eyes upon her, her father's gaze particularly heavy and meaningful. When he caught her looking, he offered her the smile that only she understood, the one that appeared warm to everyone else but contained a warning only for her. His slight nod toward the gold cufflinks he wore, the ones with the family crest, was their private reminder of family loyalty. Lily's stomach clenched. Max, sensing the spike in her anxiety, pressed more firmly against her legs, his warm brown eyes never leaving her face. The golden retriever's presence had been hard-won. Richard's attorneys had filed 3 separate motions to exclude the unnecessary emotional prop from proceedings. Only Judge's unwavering commitment to trauma-informed courtroom practices had allowed Max to remain by Lily's side. "All rise for the honorable judge," called the bailiff, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. The judge entered, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, her movements brisk but not hurried. At 62, had seen 30 years of family tragedies unfold in her courtroom. Her reputation for cutting through legal maneuvering to get to the truth had earned her both devoted admirers and determined enemies in the legal community. "Be seated," she instructed, adjusting her glasses as she surveyed the room. Her gaze lingered momentarily on Lily and Max before turning to the attorneys. "We're here in the matter of v. custody determination. I've reviewed the filings from both parties, and I must say I find disturbing inconsistencies in the evidence presented. Before we proceed with opening statements, I want to remind everyone that my primary concern is the of the child." As the proceedings began with Richard's attorney outlining Sarah's alleged parental deficiencies, Lily's attention drifted to the window where autumn leaves scattered across the courthouse lawn. She remembered happier times, family picnics in that same park, her parents laughing together, her father teaching her to fly a kite. Before the fighting started, before the secrets, before the night everything changed. Porter watched the child closely from her position near the witness area. As a veteran social worker with the Canine Courthouse Companions program, She had worked with dozens of traumatized children, but something about Lily's case troubled her deeply. The psychological evaluations contained contradictions. The child's statements in private sessions differed markedly from her formal depositions. And Richard's insistence on being present for every evaluation, despite court orders to the contrary, had raised multiple red flags. Nobody in the courtroom noticed when Lily's small hand dropped casually to her side and formed the special signal she and Max had practiced during their training sessions. Nobody except the dog, whose ears perked up instantly, and whose breath caught in her throat. The signal was subtle, 2 fingers extended against her thigh followed by a gentle tug of her earlobe. To anyone watching, it might appear as nothing more than a child's fidgeting. But to those trained in the program's protocols, it was unmistakable. It was a distress signal, the highest level. Eyes met Judge's across the courtroom. The judge, who had been thoroughly briefed on the canine companion signaling system, gave an almost imperceptible nod. Something was very wrong, and both women knew it. As Richard's attorney continued expounding on Sarah's alleged financial irresponsibility, Judge's hand moved subtly toward her gavel, preparing for what both women now realized would be necessary: an immediate intervention. The truth that Lily couldn't speak was about to be revealed through a language only she and her dog fully understood, and it would change everything in that courtroom forever. 3 months earlier, on a rain-soaked Tuesday in September, school counselor Winters had stared through her office window at the playground where children splashed in puddles, their laughter a stark contrast to the silence emanating from the small girl seated across from her desk. Lily had once been among those laughing children, a bright, talkative first grader known for her elaborate stories and infectious giggle. That Lily had vanished, replaced by a shadow child who hadn't spoken more than necessary in weeks. "Would you like to draw today instead of talking?" offered, sliding a fresh sheet of paper across her desk. Lily's eyes, dark circles beneath them suggesting nights of little sleep, flickered momentarily with interest before dulling again. She accepted the crayon with fingers that trembled slightly, an observation noted in the growing file labeled L. The picture that emerged over the next 20 minutes sent ice through the counselor's veins. A house divided by a jagged black line, a small figure huddled in a corner, while a larger figure loomed with arms outstretched like claws. Most disturbing was the red crayon pressed so hard it broke in Lily's hand, as she colored what appeared to be drops falling from the small figure. "Lily, can you tell me about what happens in this house?" asked gently. The child's response was to withdraw further into herself, shaking her head vigorously. That afternoon made 2 calls, one to Child Protective Services, which would mark her 3rd unanswered report regarding Lily, and another to an old college roommate who now ran the Canine Courthouse Companions program in Harrisburg. The bruises could be explained away by normal childhood accidents, explained to Porter over coffee the following Saturday. And Richard has half the county board in his pocket. The investigations keep getting buried, but it's the behavioral changes that terrify me. Complete personality transformation, selective mutism, somatic complaints to avoid going home, classic trauma responses. Nodded grimly, reviewing the file. The divorce proceedings are getting ugly according to court records. Mother's allegations of controlling behavior, father's counter-allegations of mental instability. Tale as old as time, except something feels desperately wrong. Finished. I've been doing this job for 16 years. I know the difference between divorce trauma and something deeper. 2 weeks later, after expedited approval through Judge's pilot program, Lily met Max for the first time at the training center, a renovated farmhouse outside Harrisburg where James, a retired K-9 officer, had established the Canine Courthouse Companions program after witnessing too many children by the legal system. Max, a 3-year-old golden retriever rescued from an abandoned property and meticulously trained for 2 years, approached Lily with the gentle intuition that made him exceptional even among therapy dogs. While other children in the program usually needed weeks to bond with their animal partners, something immediate and profound happened when Max laid his head on Lily's lap. For the first time in months, the girl wept openly, her arms encircling the dog's neck as though he were a lifeline in turbulent waters. "That's not just a therapy response," murmured two as they observed from across the room. "That's recognition." Over the following weeks, as Richard filed motions attempting to block the therapy dog intervention, claiming it was his ex-wife's attempt to manipulate their daughter, Lily and Max worked with and on more than standard comfort techniques. They developed a sophisticated communication system, subtle hand signals from Lily that would trigger specific responses from Max, creating a silent language that would be recognizable to trained observers but invisible to others. "This is beyond our standard protocol," admitted during a private meeting with Judge in her chambers. "But something about this case," he trailed off, uncharacteristically emotional. "I've read the file," Judge replied, removing her glasses. 3 dismissed CPS reports, contradictory psychological evaluations, a child who was outgoing now virtually mute, and a father who somehow manages to be present during every supposed independent evaluation despite court orders. "There's something she can't say," added. "The fear response when directly questioned about her father is off the charts, but with Max in private sessions, she's beginning to communicate through their signal system." What emerged through those silent communications chilled even, a veteran of 20 years on the police force. The drawings became more detailed. The nighttime terrors Lily experienced, which her father had attributed to her mother's influence, began to make horrifying sense. The child was carrying a secret too terrible to speak aloud, one sealed by sophisticated psychological manipulation and threats that no 8-year-old should comprehend. Richard had not just been coaching his daughter to malign her mother in custody proceedings, though evidence of that emerged as well. The successful businessman, philanthropist, and pillar of the community had been systematically terrorizing his child to maintain control, using threats against her mother and beloved pets that demonstrated a calculating cruelty at odds with his public persona. Most disturbing was the discovery that Richard had been recording their coaching sessions as insurance, blackmail material to ensure Lily's compliance by threatening to show how she had lied about her mother, manipulating the child's understanding of consequence and truth until she no longer trusted her own perceptions. "We need those recordings," Judge said grimly. "Without them, it's still her word against his, and he's got character witnesses lined up from the mayor to the chief of police." "She knows where they are," replied, "but she's terrified to say it out loud. She believes he has people watching her all the time." "And does he?" the judge asked sharply. "The new nanny he hired after firing the previous 3, former military intelligence. We've checked." On the eve of the custody hearing, Lily sat with Max in the preparation room of his office, practicing their signals one final time. The most critical signal, the one they had designed specifically for this case, would tell, and the judge that Lily knew exactly where the recordings were hidden. In her father's prized collection of rare books, specifically in a hollowed-out first edition of Great Expectations that he kept locked in his study display case. "Remember," Lily said gently, "if you feel scared tomorrow or can't say something out loud, you and Max have your special language. Judge knows it too." For the first time in months, a flicker of hope appeared in Lily's eyes as she buried her face in Max's golden fur, drawing strength from the one being she now trusted completely. The Lancaster County Courthouse hummed with anticipation on the morning of the custody hearing. Court officers nodded knowingly to each other as journalists from the local paper settled into the back row. High-profile cases involving prominent citizens always drew attention, but the case had additional intrigue. Judge was presiding, and she had allowed a service dog into her courtroom, innovations that had the legal community buzzing. The child appears to have an overactive imagination, Richard, lead attorney, Bradford, argued smoothly in his opening statement. His voice carried the polished confidence of a man who billed $850 an hour and rarely lost cases. While we sympathize with the court's desire to make accommodations for children in difficult situations, we believe these alternative methods. He paused, glancing pointedly at Max, who lay perfectly still beside Lily, only served to further dramatize what should be a straightforward custody determination. His $3,000 suit matched his client's confident demeanor. Richard sat with perfect posture at the plaintiff's table, occasionally making sympathetic eye contact with the court clerk or nodding thoughtfully at particularly compelling points in his attorney's presentation. To the casual observer, he appeared every inch the concerned father, successful, stable, and sadly burdened with an unstable ex-wife. At the defendant's table, Sarah dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. Her navy dress, clearly not new, was a stark contrast to her ex-husband's bespoke attire. Beside her, public defender Maria shuffled through disorganized papers, her expression revealing the strain of handling this high-stakes case alongside her already overwhelming caseload. She had taken on the case pro after hearing about Sarah's financial struggles since the separation, but her compassion couldn't make up for the resource disparity between the legal teams. Mrs. has demonstrated erratic behavior, continued, his voice taking on a practiced tone of regretful concern. Mood swings, financial irresponsibility, and questionable judgment regarding the child's upbringing. We have affidavits from the child's previous nanny, her piano teacher, and the director of the Lakeside Country Club summer program, all attesting to concerning observations. Judge's expression remained neutral, but her eyes narrowed slightly as she made notes. Those familiar with her courtroom demeanor recognized the subtle tell. She was questioning something. Before Ms. presents her opening statement, Judge interrupted, setting down her pen, I'd like to address an issue that troubles me. Mr., you've submitted affidavits from 17 character witnesses for Mr., yet the court-appointed evaluator was only able to interview 3 of them despite multiple attempts. Can you explain this discrepancy? A nearly imperceptible flicker of annoyance crossed Richard's face before his expression resettled into one of patient understanding. Your Honor, replied smoothly, these are busy professionals who have demanding schedules. They've provided written testimony under oath, which should be sufficient given their standing in the community. I see, Judge said, making another note. Ms., your opening statement, please. Maria stood, straightening her shoulders despite her clear nervousness. Your Honor, what we have here is a clear case of impression management and financial coercion. Since the separation 11 months ago, Mr. has systematically worked to isolate my client from her support network, drain her financial resources through continuous legal challenges, and create a narrative of instability where none exists. As detailed incidents of Richard's controlling behavior during the marriage, monitoring Sarah's phone calls, limiting her access to family finances, undermining her parental authority, Lily's eyes remained fixed on her lap. Only Porter, seated directly behind her, noticed how the child's breathing had become shallow and rapid. Mrs. was the primary caregiver throughout the child's life, continued. Mr. sudden interest in full custody coincided precisely with Mrs. request for equitable division of assets, specifically regarding his family's trust fund, which Pennsylvania law recognizes as partially marital property due to its management during the marriage. Richard leaned over to whisper something to his attorney, his expression concerned yet composed. Only Lily, watching from beneath lowered lashes, recognized the particular way his jaw tightened, a precursor to the cold anger that emerged behind closed doors. Your Honor, interjected, these financial matters are being addressed in separate proceedings. Today's hearing should focus solely on the best interests of the child. Judge nodded. While I agree that our focus is the child's, I find it relevant to understand potential motivations. Please continue, Ms. As the opening statements concluded, Judge addressed the courtroom. Given the child's age and the sensitive nature of this case, I'll be speaking with Lily privately in chambers, as previously arranged. Ms. Porter and the service animal will accompany us, along with the court reporter. Richard rose slightly. Your Honor, as the father, I believe I should be present for any questioning of my daughter. Your request is noted, and Mr. Judge replied crisply. The purpose of a private conversation is precisely to allow the child to speak without parental presence. Court is in recess for 30 minutes. As Lily stood to follow the judge, her eyes darted frantically to her father. Richard's expression remained pleasant, but he gave an almost imperceptible head shake, a warning gesture recognized only by his daughter. The message was clear. Remember our agreement. Max, sensing Lily's spike in anxiety, growled softly, a sound so unexpected in the well-trained service animal that it momentarily silenced the murmuring courtroom. Court officer, stationed by the chamber doors, raised his eyebrows in surprise. Is the animal safe, Your Honor? Asked pointedly. Max has extensive training and certification, Judge responded. His behavior is always purposeful. Ms. Porter, please bring Lily and Max to my chambers. As they walked toward the judge's private office, Lily felt her father's eyes boring into her back. Her small shoulders hunched forward as though bearing a physical weight. The dark secret she carried seemed to press down on her, making each step forward increasingly difficult. In the courtroom behind them, Richard watched their departure with a carefully composed expression that revealed nothing of his thoughts. But beneath the polished mahogany table, his manicured nails dug so deeply into his palm that they left crescent-shaped indentations in the skin. The testimony was about to begin, and despite all his preparations, Richard couldn't control what would happen behind the closed door of the judge's chambers. For the first time in the proceedings, a flicker of genuine concern crossed his face. Court officer Michael had served in the Lancaster County judicial system for 22 years, the last 15 of them assigned to Judge's courtroom. At 49, with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp, and a back that still maintained military straightness despite the bullet fragment lodged near his L4 vertebra, was known for his unflappable demeanor and keen observational skills. Very little escaped his notice in courtroom 4B. Had initially objected when he learned a dog would be permitted in the custody hearing. With all due respect, Judge, animals are unpredictable, he had argued during the pre-hearing security briefing. If something spooks it or if someone makes a sudden movement. Your concerns are noted, officer, Judge had replied, sliding a folder across her desk. But I'd like you to review the certification documents for this particular animal. The comprehensive training logs, behavioral assessments, and service animal certifications had impressed, but it was the small notation on page 17 that truly captured his attention. Handler, James, Ret K-9 Unit, Pennsylvania State Police. Had worked with briefly in 2008 during a multi-jurisdiction operation targeting human trafficking. The man's reputation with service animals was legendary in law enforcement circles. His K-9 partners had higher success rates and longer service careers than almost any others in the state program. If had trained this dog, knew it was no ordinary animal. Now, as the golden retriever positioned himself protectively between the child and her father, watched with professional interest. Judge had permitted the animal only because of emerging research on trauma reduction in child witnesses, but recognized something beyond comfort services in the dog's behavior patterns. The animal maintained situational awareness more typical of police K-9s than therapy dogs, constantly scanning, alert to subtle changes in the room's dynamics, and demonstrating what K-9 handlers called intelligent disobedience when appropriate. from his position near the chamber door, had a clear to both the witness area where Lily sat with Max and the plaintiff's table where Richard maintained his poised facade. Something in the businessman's demeanor struck as discordant. The smile was perfect, the concerned father act flawless, but had spent decades observing people in high-stress courtroom situations. Performance felt rehearsed in a way that raised the officer's instincts. When Max suddenly performed what looked like a casual stretch, but followed with 3 distinct paw taps against the polished floor, attention sharpened. The movement appeared natural to untrained observers, but to someone who had worked alongside service animals, it was clearly a trained response sequence, not random behavior. Made brief eye contact with Porter, the social worker seated behind Lily. Her slight nod confirmed his suspicions. Something orchestrated was happening between the child and the animal. The officer adjusted his position slightly, moving to a better vantage point while maintaining his professional demeanor. As the attorneys continued their opening arguments, observed another subtle exchange. Richard straightened his platinum cufflinks, an apparently innocent gesture, but his daughter's reaction was immediate and physical, a slight flinch, barely perceptible unless one was specifically watching for it. The dog's response was equally subtle but unmistakable to trained eye. Max shifted position to partially block Lily's view of her father while pressing more firmly against her legs. Counter-signaling, thought to himself, recalling the specialized training some service animals received. He'd seen similar techniques used with witnesses in protection programs, nonverbal communication systems designed to operate in plain sight. When Judge called for Lily to join her in chambers, was unsurprised to hear the dog's low growl or to see controlled but unmistakable reaction, a flash of something dangerous beneath the polished exterior. "Officer, please escort Ms. Porter, Lily, and the service animal to my chambers," Judge directed. "Yes, Your Honor," responded, moving forward with deliberate calm. As he approached the witness area, made a split-second decision based on years of courtroom instinct. Instead of positioning himself in front of Lily as would be standard protocol, he deliberately placed himself between Richard and the path to the judge's chambers, effectively blocking any potential exchange of looks or signals between father and daughter. "This way, please," he said quietly to Lily, and noticing how the child's shoulders relaxed slightly once her father was no longer in her line of sight. In the short walk to the judge's chambers, observed Max perform another trained behavior, a specific head movement and ear position that K9 handlers called an alert posture. The dog was communicating something, and based on Porter's reaction, she understood the message. Inside the judge's chambers, remained by the door as was customary, observing as Judge attempted to engage Lily in conversation. The child's responses were minimal and robotically polite, her body language screaming distress despite her careful words. "Lily," Judge said gently, "nothing you say in this room will be shared with either of your parents unless you give permission or unless I need to protect you. Do you understand?" The girl nodded without making eye contact. "Officer," the judge said, "would you please bring us some water?" Understanding this as the discreet dismissal it was, giving the child privacy, nodded and stepped outside. However, instead of heading toward the water cooler, he made a detour to his small office adjacent to the courtroom. Unlocking his desk drawer, he removed his personal cell phone and sent a text message to a number he hadn't contacted in nearly 2 years. "Working hearing with your dog Max. Need to talk. Urgent." The response came almost immediately. "Signals working." Typed affirmative. Child terrified, father controlling something. 3 dots appeared then. "Trust the dog. Watch for 3 paw taps followed by ear touch. Emergency protocol. If you see it, protect child immediately, separate from father at all costs. Evidence in father's study. First edition Dickens." Stared at the message, his law enforcement instincts on high alert. In 22 years of court service, He had learned to recognize the cases that weren't just about legal disputes but about genuine danger. Something about the case had felt wrong from the beginning, but now that vague discomfort crystallized into specific concern. Returning to the chambers with water, noticed that Max had positioned himself with his body partially covering Lily's feet, another protective posture. The child was speaking more now, but her words still had a rehearsed quality that contrasted sharply with her tense body language. When Judge excused him again, didn't return to the courtroom immediately. Instead, he took a position in the hallway where he could observe both the chamber door and the courtroom entrance. Through the partially open courtroom door, he could see Richard engaged in intense whispered conversation with his lead attorney, his carefully maintained facade showing cracks of agitation. Officer Hand moved unconsciously to rest on his service weapon, a gesture he hadn't made in a non-threatening situation for years. Something significant was unfolding in this seemingly routine custody case, and was beginning to suspect that his role would involve more than standard courtroom security before the day was through. The afternoon session began with Richard taking the witness stand. Sunlight streamed through the high windows of courtroom 4B, creating dramatic shadows across his handsome features as he placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. His voice, cultivated through years of corporate board meetings and charity fundraiser speeches, carried effortlessly to every corner of the room. "Mr. Bradford began, please describe your relationship with your daughter." Richard smiled warmly, the picture of paternal devotion. "Lily and I have always been extremely close. Even before the separation, I was the one who helped with her homework, attended her school functions, and handled her medical appointments. Sarah was often unavailable." The calculated pause before "unavailable" allowed listeners to fill in their own assumptions about Sarah's maternal capabilities. In the defendant's chair, Sarah flinched visibly. "Could you elaborate on your ex-wife's unavailability?" prompted. "I hate speaking ill of Lily's mother," Richard replied, his expression a masterful blend of reluctance and concern. But there were periods when Sarah would spend entire days in bed. Her mood swings became increasingly unpredictable. There were instances when I'd return home from work to find Lily unfed, homework incomplete, sometimes even alone while Sarah was sleeping off one of her episodes. A murmur rippled through the spectator section. Judge tapped her gavel once, silencing the room. "And how has Lily been affected by the separation?" continued. Richard's expression shifted to one of pained concern. "It's been heartbreaking to witness. She was always such a vibrant, talkative child. Since the separation, particularly during the periods she stays with her mother, she's become withdrawn, anxious, and her academic performance has suffered significantly." As her father, Lily sat motionless beside Porter. Following her private session with Judge, the child seemed to have retreated even further into herself. Only the steady presence of Max, pressed warmly against her legs, appeared to be keeping her grounded. "Has Lily expressed concerns about her time with her mother?" asked. "She's been reluctant to speak directly about it," Richard replied. "But I've documented concerning behaviors after her weekend visits, nightmares, emotional outbursts. The child psychologist we consulted, Doctor, suggested these are typical reactions to an unstable environment." At the mention of Doctor, Judge interrupted. "Mr. To clarify, you're referring to Dr. Benjamin, who provided the evaluation dated September 15th. "Yes, Your Honor." "And who selected Doctor for this evaluation?" A barely perceptible hesitation. "I believe my attorney made the recommendation based on his expertise in child psychology." Judge made a note before gesturing for to continue. As Richard's testimony shifted to allegations of Sarah's financial irresponsibility, Lily's breathing became increasingly shallow. Noticed the child's small fingers gripping the edge of her chair so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Max, too, seemed to sense the escalating distress, his eyes moving constantly between Lily and Richard. "My primary concern," Richard continued, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity, "is creating stability for our daughter. The constant transitions between households, her mother's emotional volatility, the financial uncertainty, it's all taking a tremendous toll on Lily's." As he spoke these words, Lily's left hand dropped casually to her side in a motion so natural it appeared meaningless to most observers. With methodical precision, she tapped her index finger twice against her thigh and then tugged gently at her earlobe, movements that could easily be dismissed as a child's fidgeting. Max immediately sat up, ears alert. The shift in the dog's posture was subtle but immediate. Porter's breath caught. This was the emergency signal they had practiced, the highest-level distress indicator in their private communication system. The golden retriever then performed what appeared to be a routine stretch, but followed it with 3 distinct paw taps against the floor, first right paw, then left, then right again. He then touched his nose briefly to his ear before settling back into a seemingly relaxed position. To the untrained eye, these movements appeared random. To those familiar with the Canine Companion Program's signal system, it was an unmistakable message. The child is in immediate danger. Intervention required. Officer, watching from his position near the judge's bench, recognized the sequence instantly from his earlier conversation with. His posture shifted subtly, moving into what his colleagues would recognize as his alert stance, weight balanced, hands free, ready to respond. Porter immediately made eye contact with Judge, giving an almost imperceptible nod. The judge's gaze sharpened, her experienced eyes taking in the tableau before her. The child's rigid posture, the dog's alert stance, Richard's smooth testimony, and the silent communication passing between Porter and Officer. "In conclusion," Richard was saying, "I believe that awarding me full custody with supervised visitation for Sarah would provide Lily with the stable, nurturing environment she desperately needs. My financial resources ensure she'll have access to the best educational opportunities, continued therapy, and a consistent routine, all essential elements for her recovery from this traumatic period." As he finished speaking, Richard's eyes met his daughter's across the courtroom. To most observers, the look appeared to be one of reassurance and affection. Only Lily understood the warning it contained, a reminder of their private conversations about family loyalty and keeping secrets. In that moment, something shifted in the child's demeanor. Later would describe it as watching a dam finally break under too much pressure. Lily's small hand formed another signal, this one unfamiliar to but clearly recognized by Max, who immediately performed a specific response. 3 paw taps, a stretched neck, and a specific head tilt toward Richard. Judge's gavel slammed down with such sudden force that the court reporter jumped, her fingers momentarily frozen above her stenotype machine. "This court is in immediate recess," she announced, her voice cutting through the confusion as all eyes turned to the trembling child and her now alert service dog. The judge's tone left no room for discussion or objection. Richard's composure slipped for a fraction of a second, a flash of something cold and calculating crossing his features before the concerned father mask snapped back into place. But Judge had seen it, as had Officer, whose hand now rested casually near his service weapon. "Your Honor," began, "my client hasn't finished his testimony." "This court is in recess," Judge repeated, rising from her bench with unusual haste. "Officer, please secure the courtroom. No one is to leave until I return." As bewildered murmurs filled the room, leaned down to whisper reassuringly to Lily. The child's eyes remained locked on Max, drawing strength from the one being in the room she trusted completely. The signal had been given. The carefully constructed narrative was about to unravel, and nothing in Richard's considerable arsenal of influence and manipulation could stop what was about to happen. "Everyone remain seated," Judge commanded, her normally composed demeanor replaced with urgent authority. The sudden shift in her tone silenced the murmurs that had erupted following her abrupt recess announcement. In 15 years presiding over family court, had developed a reputation for unflappable calm even in the most contentious cases. The sharp edge in her voice now sent a clear message to everyone in Courtroom 4B. Something extraordinary was occurring. The bailiff, responding to the judge's tone rather than any explicit instruction, moved to stand near Richard's table, his posture casual but his positioning deliberate. Officer simultaneously stepped closer to Lily and Max, placing himself between them and Richard with practiced nonchalance that nonetheless established a protective barrier. "Your Honor," Bradford began, his smooth confidence faltering slightly in the face of this unexpected development, "may I inquire as to the nature of—" "You may not, counsel," Judge cut him off, her words precise as a scalpel. "This recess is not open for discussion or negotiation." The judge descended from her bench with unprecedented haste, legal protocols momentarily set aside, as she approached Lily directly. The action was so unexpected and contrary to judicial procedure that a collective intake of breath could be heard throughout the courtroom. Judges simply did not leave their bench to approach witnesses during proceedings. The symbolic separation between judicial authority and courtroom participants was sacrosanct in American legal tradition. Court reporter Melissa's fingers hovered uncertainly over her stenotype machine. Nothing in her 12 years of experience had prepared her for how to transcribe this irregular development. Her eyes darted to her supervisor, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Record everything." Richard rose halfway from his seat, his expression a carefully modulated blend of concern and confusion. "Your Honor, as Lily's father, I'm concerned about what's happening. Perhaps I should." "Mr. Judge's voice cut through the room like ice. "You will remain exactly where you are." She did not look at him as she spoke, her attention focused entirely on the small, trembling figure of Lily. Richard froze, then slowly sank back into his chair. His attorney leaned over to whisper something, but Richard appeared not to hear, his eyes fixed on his daughter and the judge now kneeling before her, an unprecedented breach of courtroom hierarchy. The spectators in the gallery remained motionless, sensing they were witnessing something significant beyond their understanding. Among them, a court illustrator's pencil moved rapidly across her sketchpad, capturing the tableau. The judge on one knee before a child, a golden retriever in alert posture, officers positioned strategically, and a handsome businessman whose perfect facade showed the first hairline cracks of genuine alarm. Sarah half rose from her chair, maternal instinct warring with courtroom protocol. Her attorney, Maria, gently touched her arm, silently counseling patience. Sarah subsided, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles whitened, her eyes never leaving her daughter. Judge knelt to Lily's eye level, her judicial robes pooling around her in a way that would have seemed undignified in any other circumstance. When she spoke, her voice was pitched for Lily's ears alone, though the utter silence in the courtroom allowed her words to carry faintly. "Lily," she said gently, "do you remember what I told you in my chambers, about my most important job?" The child gave a barely perceptible nod. "And what did I say that job was?" the judge prompted. Lily's voice, when it finally came, was so soft that those beyond the first row strained to hear. To keep me safe." "That's right," Judge confirmed. "Not to decide who's right or wrong, not to follow every rule in my books. My first job is to keep you safe. Do you believe me?" Another tiny nod. "Your dog just told us something important," the judge continued. "Something you've been afraid to say. Was Max right to tell us?" Lily's eyes darted frantically toward her father, then back to the judge. Max pressed more firmly against her legs, and Porter placed a gentle, supportive hand on her shoulder. "He can't hurt you anymore," Judge promised, though she kept her voice low enough that only those immediately surrounding them could hear the words clearly. Officer is going to stay right beside you, and no one will take you anywhere without my personal approval. Do you understand?" Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she gave another small nod. Then, in a movement that stunned even Porter, the child leaned forward and whispered directly into Judge's ear. The judge's expression remained professionally neutral, but those who knew her well noticed the slight widening of her eyes and the momentary tightening of her jaw. She straightened and turned to Officer. "Please escort Ms. Porter, Lily, and Max to conference room C. Deputy Clark will join you there immediately." "Yes, Your Honor," responded, his training allowing him to maintain a calm exterior despite the irregular proceedings. As Lily stood, Richard's composure finally slipped. "This is outrageous," he declared, rising fully from his chair. "Whatever game is being played here?" "Mr. Judge's voice carried all the authority of her position despite her unorthodox location in the courtroom. "Sit down immediately, or I will have you removed and held in contempt." The gallery tensed collectively. Richard was not a man accustomed to being addressed in such a manner. His wealth and connections had insulated him from such direct confrontations for decades. For a moment, the outcome hung in the balance as two formidable wills clashed silently across the courtroom. Then, with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, slowly resumed his seat. "Of course, Your Honor, I'm simply concerned for my daughter's welfare in this unusual situation." "Your concern is noted," Judge replied, her tone making it clear how little weight his concern carried at this moment. As Officer guided Lily toward the side door, Richard suddenly called out, "Lily, sweetheart, everything will be okay. Daddy loves." "Mr. Judge's voice cracked like a whip. "You will not address the child. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. remains seated and silent." The courtroom had become utterly still, the usual shuffling of papers and whispered consultations completely absent as everyone watched the unprecedented drama unfold. Even veteran court employees exchanged glances, recognizing they were witnessing something exceptional in legal proceedings. As Lily reached the doorway, she paused and looked back, not at her father but at her mother. The two locked eyes across the room in a moment of silent communion before Officer gently guided the child through the door, Max padding faithfully at her side. Judge returned to her bench with measured steps that restored some of the disrupted courtroom decorum. When she spoke again, her voice had regained its judicial composure, though an undercurrent of steel remained. "This court is in recess for 45 minutes. Mr. and counsel will remain in the courtroom. Mrs. and counsel may join me in chambers immediately. Court security will ensure that no one enters or leaves this room without my express authorization." She gathered her notes with deliberate care, then fixed Richard with a gaze that had made hardened criminals confess over her 15 years on the bench. "Mr. Your phone and any other electronic devices in your possession will be temporarily secured by the bailiff. This is non-negotiable." As the implications of this directive registered across Richard's face, Judge added with deadly precision, "And while we're in recess, I suggest you contemplate very carefully the penalties for perjury, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice in my courtroom." The gavel came down with finality, leaving Richard staring at the empty witness chair, his carefully constructed world beginning to collapse around him. Judge's chambers had never seemed so crowded. Sarah perched anxiously on the edge of a leather chair, her attorney standing supportively behind her. Court psychologist Dr. Taylor sat in quiet observation, her experienced eyes missing nothing. Court reporter Melissa had set up her stenotype machine in the corner, ready to create an official record. And Deputy District Attorney James had arrived with remarkable speed, his presence indicating the sudden shift from family court matter to potential criminal investigation. In the center of this assemblage of legal professionals sat Lily in a chair that seemed too large for her small frame. Max lay across her feet, his warm weight a constant reassurance. Porter remained at her side, occasionally offering gentle encouragement but primarily allowing the child to find her own words at last. "Lily," Judge began, her tone gentle but direct, "everything you say in this room is being recorded officially, but nothing will be shared with your father without proper legal procedures. Do you understand what that means?" The child nodded hesitantly. "For the record, I need you to answer verbally," the judge explained. "Yes," Lily whispered, "I understand. Dr. Taylor is here to make sure our questions don't upset you unnecessarily, and your mom is here because you asked for her. Is that still okay with you?" "Yes," the word came slightly stronger this time. Judge nodded to DDA, who moved his chair to create a less confrontational angle before addressing Lily. "Hi Lily, I'm Mr. You can call me James if you want. My job is to help make sure everyone follows the rules, especially grown-ups. Can you tell me about the signal you and Max used in the courtroom?" Lily's fingers twisted in Max's fur as she began to speak. "It's our danger signal. We practiced it with Mr. It means I need help but can't say it out loud." "Why couldn't you say it out loud?" asked gently. Lily's eyes darted to her mother, then back to her lap. "Because of the promises." "What promises, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking with emotion. A tear slid down Lily's cheek. "Daddy made me promise not to tell about our special meetings. He said if I told anyone, especially you, Mom, that bad things would happen." "What kind of bad things?" prompted. "He said you would go to the hospital again, but this time you wouldn't come back." The words tumbled out as Lily's composure began to crumble. "He said they would take Max away and put him down because he was dangerous. He said nobody would believe me anyway because he had videos of me lying." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Judge held up a hand, silently counseling patience. "Videos?" asked, his tone remaining measured despite the alarming revelation. Lily nodded, her small shoulders beginning to shake. "He has a special camera hidden in his study. When we have our coaching sessions, that's what he calls them, he records everything. He makes me practice what to say about Mom, that she's crazy, that she forgets to feed me, that she leaves me alone." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But it's not true. None of it's true." Dr. Taylor interjected softly. "Lily, you're doing wonderfully. Would it help to take a short break?" The child shook her head. "I want to finish. I don't want to be scared anymore." "Where are these recordings kept?" asked. "In his special books, the ones nobody is allowed to touch." Lily's voice grew slightly stronger as she continued. "There's a big book with a secret compartment inside, Great Expectations. It's Daddy's favorite. He says it's worth thousands of dollars, but he hollowed it out. The memory cards are inside, and there's a little black book with all his passwords and special numbers." And Judge exchanged meaningful glances. "Lily," Judge said carefully, "how do you know about these hiding places?" "I saw him put the things away one night when he thought I was asleep. I sometimes pretend to be asleep because it's safer." The matter-of-fact way she described this survival strategy caused several adults in the room to briefly look away, composing themselves. Porter gently prompted, "Can you tell them about the other things you told me? About what happens during the coaching sessions?" Lily's hand went to her arm, unconsciously rubbing a spot near her elbow. "If I don't say the right things, if I forget what I'm supposed to say about Mom, he gets mad. Not yelling mad, that would be better. He gets quiet mad." "What happens when he gets quiet mad?" asked. "He squeezes my arm, not where people can see, and he smiles while he does it, so if anyone came in, they would think everything was okay." Lily's voice had become almost mechanical, as though she were reciting rather than reliving. "And he tells me stories about what happens to little girls who betray their fathers. Bad things. Scary things." Sarah made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her attorney placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "And the recordings," Judge prompted gently. "What does he say about those?" "He says they're his insurance. If I ever tell anyone about our special meetings, he'll show everyone the videos of me saying bad things about Mom. He says they'll think I'm a liar, and liars go to juvenile detention, and Max could never visit me there." The room fell silent for a moment, the adults processing the calculated psychological manipulation being described by an 8-year-old child. "Lily," Dr. Taylor said softly, "what you're describing is not your fault. Your father was using something called manipulation and coercion. Do you know what those words mean?" The child shook her head. "It means he was using fear to control you, and that's something adults are never supposed to do to children. What you've done today, telling us the truth, was incredibly brave." Max shifted position, pressing his warm body more firmly against Lily's legs. The gesture seemed to give her strength. "There's something else," Lily said, her voice steadying slightly. "Something important about the book." "The Great Expectations book," clarified. Lily nodded. "Inside, with the memory cards, there's another card, a green one. That one has the videos of Mrs. Wilson." Judge leaned forward slightly. "Who is Mrs. Wilson, Lily?" "She was my first nanny after Mom moved out. She was nice. She let me call Mom even though Daddy said phone calls weren't in the custody agreement. One day she was just gone. Daddy said she had to move away suddenly, but—" Lily hesitated. "But what, sweetheart?" Sarah encouraged gently. "But I heard Daddy on the phone that night. He was talking about how Mrs. Wilson was smart to take the money and sign the papers, or else the videos would ruin her life." Lily's eyes filled with tears again. "After that, all my nannies were different. They had rules about not talking to Mom, not talking about Mom, reporting everything to Daddy." DDA made rapid notes before addressing Judge. "Your Honor, based on this testimony, I believe we have sufficient cause for an emergency search warrant for Mr. Residence, specifically targeting the location described by the minor." Judge nodded. "I concur. I'll contact Judge in criminal court immediately." She turned to Officer, who had maintained a discreet position by the door. "Officer, please request that Detective Sawyer join us immediately." As stepped out to comply, Sarah finally spoke directly to her daughter. "Lily, I'm so sorry. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined." Her voice broke. "He said you wouldn't believe me," Lily whispered. "He said you were too fragile, that the truth would break you." Sarah moved to kneel beside her daughter's chair, careful to avoid disturbing Max. "Nothing could break me more than being kept away from you. Nothing your father did or made you say could ever change how much I love you." For the first time since entering the chambers, Lily reached out, her small hand finding her mother's. The simple physical connection seemed to release something that had been tightly bound within the child. Tears came freely now, not the terrified, silent tears of before, but healing sobs that shook her entire body. Max adjusted his position, laying his head directly in Lily's lap as she cried. Dr. Taylor nodded approvingly at the dog's intuitive response, exchanging a knowing glance with Porter. The breakthrough they were witnessing, a child finally unburdening herself of a terrible secret, represented the first step in what would undoubtedly be a long healing process. Outside in the courtroom, unaware of the detailed testimony being given, Richard sat in increasingly agitated silence, watching the minute hand of the clock tick past the promised 45-minute recess. His attorney's whispered reassurances had grown less confident with each passing minute. The truth, so long contained by fear and manipulation, had finally been unleashed, and its consequences were about to reshape the lives of everyone connected to the family. When Judge re-entered Courtroom 4B, the transformation in her demeanor was immediately apparent to the assembled attorneys, court personnel, and spectators. The measured judicial neutrality that had characterized her earlier presence had hardened into something resolute and uncompromising. At 62, with 3 decades of experience on the bench, had presided over thousands of family court cases, many contentious, some heartbreaking, but few had affected her as profoundly as what she had just witnessed in her chambers. She took her seat without the customary "all rise" announcement, a procedural irregularity that signaled to the experienced legal professionals present that normal protocols had been suspended. "This hearing will resume with modified parameters," she announced, her voice carrying an edge that silenced even the whispered consultations between Richard and his legal team. "The court has received testimony that necessitates immediate intervention." Richard straightened in his chair, his expression carefully composed into one of concerned confusion. "Your Honor, may I ask where my daughter is? As her father, I'm deeply concerned about." "Mr. Judge interrupted, you will speak in this courtroom only when directly addressed by the court. Is that understood?" A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face before he nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "For the record," Judge continued, "Lily is currently under the temporary protective custody of the court, accompanied by her mother, Sarah, court-appointed advocate Porter, and the service animal Max. Deputy District Attorney is present with them." Bradford rose quickly. "Your Honor, the introduction of criminal counsel without notice to the plaintiff represents a serious procedural." "Counsel," Judge's voice could have frozen flowing water, "you would be well advised to consider your next words with extreme care. What begins as zealous advocacy can, under certain circumstances, cross into participatory misconduct." The implications of her statement sent a visible ripple through the legal team. Hesitated, then slowly resumed his seat. "The court has received credible testimony regarding witness tampering, coercion of a minor, creation of false evidence, psychological abuse, and potential blackmail of multiple parties." Judge's words fell like stones in the silent courtroom. "Based on this testimony, I have conferred with Judge of the Criminal Division, who has authorized an immediate search warrant for the residence, specifically targeting evidentiary materials described in detail by Lily." Richard's composure finally cracked, his face draining of color as he half rose from his chair. "This is outrageous. Whatever my disturbed ex-wife has coached my daughter to say." "Mr. Judge's voice cut through his protest like a scalpel, "you are speaking without permission. One more interruption and you will be removed from my courtroom and held in contempt. Detective Sawyer and the County Evidence Response Team are currently executing a search warrant at your residence, focusing specifically on the hollowed-out first edition of Great Expectations in your study." The specificity of this statement struck Richard with visible force. He sank back into his chair, his manicured hands gripping the arms with white-knuckled intensity. "In light of these developments," Judge continued, "I am issuing the following emergency orders effective immediately." She lifted a document bearing her fresh signature. "Temporary full custody of Lily is awarded to Sarah. Richard is barred from all contact, direct or indirect, with the child pending full investigation and potential criminal proceedings. Mr. will surrender his passport to the court within 24 hours and is restricted from traveling outside Lancaster County." The judge paused, looking directly at Richard for the first time since re-entering the courtroom. "Mr., do you understand these orders?" For a moment, it seemed Richard might defy her. The courtroom held its collective breath as something dangerous flickered behind his eyes, a glimpse of the man Lily had described in her testimony, the one who became quiet mad. "Your Honor," he finally responded, his voice tightly controlled, "I understand the orders, but I categorically deny any wrongdoing. Whatever testimony you've received is either the product of coaching by my ex-wife or the confused imaginings of a child influenced by the stress of this separation." Judge regarded him steadily. "Mr., I have presided over approximately 7,000 family court cases in my career. I have heard children testify under countless circumstances. What I heard today was not coached testimony or confused imagination. It was the unburdening of a terrified child who has been systematically manipulated and silenced." She gestured toward the courtroom doors, where Officer now stood with two uniformed deputies. You will be escorted from the courthouse by these officers, who will accompany you to surrender any keys to the family residence, where Mrs. and Lily will be returning today under protective supervision. As Richard was led from the courtroom, his legal team frantically gathering materials behind him, Sarah entered from the side door accompanied by Maria. Sarah's face showed the complicated emotions of the day, exhaustion and residual fear mingled with profound relief and the first tentative signs of restored dignity. Mrs. Judge addressed her directly, setting aside judicial formality. Arrangements have been made for a victim services coordinator to meet you at your home. Dr. Taylor has provided referrals for trauma-informed therapy for Lily, which the court will ensure is covered regardless of insurance limitations. Sarah nodded, seemingly unable to speak as the full import of the day's events continued to unfold. "Where is Lily now?" Judge asked gently. "With Max in the children's waiting room," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than might have been expected. She's drawing a picture for Officer. She says he's her hero." A rare smile briefly softened Judge's features. "Officer will escort you home when you're ready. A victim advocate will meet you there, and officers will remain on site for at least the next 72 hours. As Sarah turned to leave, Judge added, "Mrs., what your daughter did today was extraordinarily brave, but courage like that doesn't come from nowhere. She is her mother's daughter." The courtroom had nearly emptied when Judge's clerk approached with a telephone. "Your Honor, Detective Sawyer is calling from the residence." The judge took the phone, listening intently for several minutes, her expression growing increasingly grave. When she finally spoke, it was with quiet certainty. "Secure everything exactly as you found it. I want the forensics team to document the scene meticulously." Yes, I understand the implications. Thank you, Detective." As she returned to her chambers, Judge paused to look back at the now empty courtroom, the scene of countless family dramas over her long career. Few had ended with such dramatic intervention, but few had begun with such calculated cruelty masked behind wealth and social position. 3 weeks later, the Lancaster County Courthouse hosted an unusual ceremony in its main atrium. Judge, dressed in her judicial robes, knelt to place a special commendation medal around Max's neck, the first service animal in the county's history to receive such recognition. Lily, standing proudly beside her canine companion, smiled a real smile for the first time in months as cameras flashed and the assembled courthouse staff applauded. The criminal case against Richard was still developing, with additional charges accumulating as investigators discovered evidence of witness tampering, extending to 3 former nannies and a psychological evaluator. But for Lily, the most important outcome had already been secured. Her voice had finally been heard, her truth acknowledged. As mother and daughter left the courthouse that afternoon, Lily walked with her head held higher, one hand holding her mother's, the other resting confidently on Max's head. The golden retriever padded faithfully beside her, no longer needed as a secret translator but remaining as a steadfast companion for the healing journey ahead. In her chambers, Judge added a final note to the case file before signing the permanent custody order. Justice in family court is not measured merely by legal correctness, but by whether we have truly heard the voices of those least able to speak for themselves. Today, with the assistance of an extraordinary service animal, the court finally heard the truth that had been systematically silenced. Let this case serve as a reminder that justice sometimes arrives in unexpected forms, even, as in this instance, with 4 paws and a golden coat.